WebGL, graphics revolution or internet menace? Then 3D, which do you prefer, active or passive? The answer doesn't really surprise me that much. And then virtual worlds, cropping up everywhere, and even now there's a certificate for a degree on This Week in Viz. In Viz for July 10th. We took last week off for July the 4th. I hope everyone had a good one. The biggest story this last week was actually an opinion piece from John Petty looking at the recent announcement from Microsoft that WebGL is actually a security threat that they don't plan on actually doing much with. Now, this initially made some pretty big waves through the marketplace, and it was based on a security report from Context that demonstrated two possible vulnerabilities in WebGL. One was frankly not that surprising. Through a special series of commands, you could basically lock up the graphics card. On some OSs, that's not a big deal, but on Windows, that pretty much leads to a blue screen. The other one was a little more interesting, of a series of combinations that could exploit something like a cross-site scripting vulnerability. It's not quite what it was, but it's the easiest thing to think of it as. Of course, this has already been resolved, and in the new WebGL 1.1 spec that's coming out, this is no longer an issue. So, if you look a little bit deeper, as John Petty did, you can see where Microsoft was one of the primary funders of the research. Of course, they don't like WebGL. They'd rather see people instead going with their own internal stuff like Silverlight. So, it really was just a bit of a PR piece for Microsoft trying to buy some time for their own technologies to take off. As with any technology, there's going to be improvements. The early versions will have problems. Time will take care of it. We'll just have to see if something better than WebGL comes along in the near future. I don't think there'll be anything that will replace it in the near term. Another interesting article this week was a pair of articles, actually, about 3D TV in the marketplace. First off was the announcement that Samsung is the far and wide leader in the consumer 3D space, owning, depending on which report you trust, somewhere between 50 to 61% of the market. This really isn't any surprise to me, at least since, as I understand it, Samsung was really the first company to come to the table with a truly comprehensive package deal where you could get the TV, the Blu-ray player, get a nice kit that actually came with a couple of mainstream movies, not IMAX or documentaries, but actually Monsters vs. Aliens and such. And they were out with that before anybody was. So it makes sense that they would have a huge lead just from getting there first, and then word of mouth from people that are happy with the product pitching it to their friends. The other interesting announcement was that a consumer study showed that consumers prefer passive stereo to active stereo 4-1. Now, this is somewhat understandable and somewhat counterintuitive. Most passive displays right now suffer from a pretty serious degradation of resolution. Generally, they wind up using something like a horizontal interlaced line approach, so that the best you can really get is actually 720p, not a full 1080p, because you lose half of your horizontal lines of resolution, one for each eye. The active stereo gives you full resolution, but of course then you have those really expensive, bulky 3D glasses. The nice thing about passive displays is that the glasses are practically disposable, 99 cents to $1. You can buy them on Amazon by the truckload. So only time will tell which one will continue to push forward. Consumers and companies right now are putting a lot of stock into passive 3D. The auto stereoscopic stuff is there, but it hasn't really reached a point where it's of the quality that most people want. Passive stereo is here, it's available. There's a lot of new models coming out in the market from names like Samsung, LG, Panasonic, Sony, and many others. So we'll just have to keep an eye on the market. Personally, I'm a fan of the passive 3D stereo. I like the cheap glasses, and the resolution loss isn't that big of a deal when you're watching movies or TV. It's a little bit bigger if you're trying to use it for actual scientific research, but that's of course not what's driving the industry at this point. So to change topics, something that I thought was pretty interesting. I'm a big Minecraft fan. I don't know how many of you know that, but me and my daughter and some of her friends play regularly. I run a server. I've been experimenting with pistons and such. It's a great game if you've never played it. Some people have been looking at the possibility of using it, though, as a rapid prototyping modeling tool. A group from MIT's Media Lab actually showed a demonstration of creating an object inside Minecraft, then delineating two opposite corners and exporting that geometry as a model suitable for printing in either a high-end stereolith machine or something as simple as a MakerBot. The results were impressive. Minecraft is simple enough to pick up and use that it really could open the modeling to a whole new world of users, especially kids and youngsters. But I can't imagine it being used for much high-end production use. Still, it's an interesting little toy that they've put together. It's an interesting idea. Be sure to check out the video for all their details. Another interesting announcement this week was a set of ray tracing kernels released by Intel called the Intel Embry suite. It's a series of kernels optimized for CPU acceleration sets like SSE that can give you some pretty impressive results. They showed some videos and some interviews with the creators showing some what looks like rather impressive models being ray traced in real time in a method very similar to what iRay and bunk speed does, where you see it as you manipulate it, you get a very low-res grainy rendering, and then as you let go, it all slowly starts to come in as it can spend more time casting out more rays. Unfortunately, there's very little in what I would call benchmarkable details at this point. They don't give triangle counts of the models. I don't think the actual models they show are available for benchmarking in other packages. And the numbers they show are very vague, throwing out things like get a perfect rendering in about a minute. So I'm not sure how production worthy these are, but they're definitely something to look at if you're into the GPU versus CPU in ray tracing debate. So another kind of a series of announcements this week came out revolving around virtual worlds, specifically Second Life. First off, the University of Washington is actually offering a new degree program. It's about a year long. The class itself is offered all entirely online and inside virtual worlds, and in the end should give you the expertise you need to operate virtual worlds everywhere from an engineer to a product manager to a marketing person. It's a pretty comprehensive goal, but it's another sign that virtual worlds really are coming into their own. After that, there was an announcement from Dayton Limited that they've put online a virtual library tour of Birmingham. Now, apparently the city of Birmingham is preparing to renovate and construct a new library. So what they did was they took the early architectural and engineering drawings, modeled it inside Second Life, and allow people to go and visit it. Inside there, they've got some pretty detailed statistical tools set up to analyze personals' behavior and how they traverse the library, and allow people to post comments on how they feel about certain aspects of the library. All of that can be fed back to the designers to modify the design and then update on the fly the actual architectural model inside the world. It kind of turns the virtual world into an iterative design tool. It's interesting, but you have to wonder how many of the citizens of Birmingham are actually checking this out and how many just random people like me happen to log in and check it out that really have no interest in the physical model, strictly in the virtual side of it. It's an interesting research project. I hope to keep an eye on it, and I hope to see some more results coming out of it as they actually break ground and build the physical structures and see how they continue to link it up with the virtual world. One other really interesting announcement that came out this week was from the folks behind the Franken camera, and most of the articles you hear these days about computational photography that have decided to take their technology mainstream, and they're coming out with a camera called the Lytro. Now, this first camera won't be all that technically impressive, offering only 512 by 512 resolution. It makes it somewhat perfectly suited for Facebook and TwitPic and features like that. But the fact that it's going to allow all the same computational photography features, such as focus after the fact, depth of field correction, HDR, and several other tricks, could make it interesting to check out. There's no details on pricing yet, but they do plan to have the hardware out later this year. So if I can get my hands on one, I definitely want to take it for a test drive. From what I've seen of some of their earlier technology and their presentations at SIGGRAPH last year, the computational photography movement really does look to be the next step in digital photography. So that pretty much wraps up this week. So I'm going to wrap it up with the infographic of the week, which was Bye Bye Space Shuttle. It's an interesting, large format infographic that covers some of the important milestones of the space program and of this last shuttle launch. Of course, the last launch of Atlantis was this week, and according to NASA, that's it. We'll just have to wait and see if something does finally come along to replace it. So go check out the infographic and see what you think. That's all we've got for this week. Look forward to seeing you again next.